welcome back to EH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is 10 cards you should be putting in your Commander decks, episode 21. And starting out this week with Back from the Brink. 4 blue enchantment. Exile a creature card from your graveyard and pay its mana cost. Create a token that's a copy of that card. Activate only as a sorcery. So this is a card that people have put in their Temet decks before. I had a Temet deck and I put this in there because you want to be creating token copies of your creatures. Really what it does is it sort of just gives all the creatures in your graveyard flashback. I mean, you're creating a token, sure, but essentially, because you have to pay the cost, it just gives them all flashback. But in particular, the reason I'm mentioning this is because of a lot of the new cards that have come out, like Essex, like Adrix and Nev. People are probably looking for some token generators for decks like that. And particularly in Adrix and Nev, I mean, I create a token copy of my creature and I get 2 instead. Seems pretty darn good, right? And even if you've been looking at the Modern Horizons 2 spoilers, they really seem to be leaning towards the token thing a lot. There's a lot of cards in Modern Horizons 2 that sort of care about creating tokens. So this is a card that could see some more play because of that. Coming in at number 2 this week, Backlash. 1, a black and a red instant. Tap target untapped creature. That creature deals damage equal to its power to its controller. That's it. Pretty simple. I just really like this card. I've put it in a couple of decks. It's sort of a gotcha card, I suppose. I know people will say, hey, why don't you just terminate the creature, you know? I mean, for me, one of my favorite plays of all time, I've got like a top 10 list of my favorite Commander plays of all time. One of my favorites is guy gets out his Blightsteel Colossus, and I just so happen to have Backlash in my hand. And the funny thing is I almost had just used it, but I decided not to. And it's a good thing I saved it. I just backlashed my opponent's Blightsteel Colossus, and that creature deals damage equal to its power to its controller. So he was dead, right? He took all that infect damage and immediately died. And I know that's a fringe example, but even anything, really. It's instant speed. My opponent's about to attack me with a big creature. I just tap it down, and then also it deals damage to its own controller. Coming in at number 3, Balancing Act. And I just talked about this one in my underwhelming Commanders video. I put it in my Yosei deck. I thought it was a great fit there. 2 white sorcery. Each player chooses a number of permanents they control equal to the number of permanents controlled by the player who controls the fewest, then sacrifices the rest. Each player discards cards the same way. So, I've talked about this at length. This is what white does. I know it doesn't seem fun, but this just puts everyone on the same level, right? Obviously, this is sort of the, fixed version of balance. Balance being banned in the format, obviously. This would be the version that you can actually play. What I really like about this is each player chooses a number of permanents they control. So you don't have to sacrifice a bunch of lands. You can keep all your lands with this, unless you have like 50 lands, in which case no one should feel bad for you if you have to sacrifice a bunch. But basically you just count the permanents. Whichever player has the least amount of permanents, everyone sacrifices down to that. Whoever has the least amount of cards, people discard down to that. It just evens things out, which I really like. I know people don't like effects like this, but for me, I really like them. And I sort of went on a bit of a rant in that video that, there's so many things that people don't like. It really doesn't matter if you play a card like this. People don't like stacks. People don't like counter spells, right? That's one thing people really hate. I hear so many complaints about that. There's so many strategies that people don't like that I think if we avoid all the strategies that people don't like, there isn't going to leave a whole lot left to play, right? So anyway, moving on to number 4, and it's Battle Hymn. 1 and a red instant. Add 1 red for each creature you control. That's it. Just add a red mana for each creature you control. I don't know how many people know this card exists. I've seen it a few times in a game. Obviously, it's fantastic in a Krenko deck, any deck where you have lots of little creatures. It is an older card, so I'm giving it a mention just in case there's people out there that don't know it exists. It's a really fantastic ritual effect. If you have 5 or 6 creatures, this is 2 mana and you get 6. That's really, really good. Coming in at number 5, Belbys Portal. 5 mana artifact. As Belbys Portal enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Pay 3 mana and tap. You may put a creature card of the chosen type from your hand onto the battlefield. Now, I know there's some people out there that are going to be like, this is 5 mana and it doesn't impact the board right away. I guess those people aren't going to like this. For me, there's a couple of different ways to actually use this. And I know, first of all, you're going to say, okay, well, you're choosing a creature type, so this gets played in a tribal deck. Yes, obviously you could put this in a tribal deck. Probably a tribal deck where you have expensive creatures like a dragon tribal deck, for example, right? Really, you want creatures that are going to cost at least 3, probably more, in order for you to get a good rate here. They are coming into play at instant speed. Don't forget that. You are putting the creatures into play whenever you want, which can be a really big advantage. It sort of gives your creatures pseudo haste. It protects them from board wipes. That in itself is a really big advantage. It can also be really good in any deck where I'm returning my commander to my hand a lot. So for example, a Tetsumok deck, and I've had a couple people ask me about making a Tetsumok deck. So what you can do is you can just play this and name Dinosaur. You want Tetsumok in your hand so you can use that ability. So you just want to keep returning it to your hand. It dies, then you return it to your hand. You don't want it ever to go back to the command zone. So a card like this is great because you can just pay 3 mana. It only is for your commander. That's it. You're only using it for your commander, nothing else, and you're putting it directly into play. I think it would even work in a Rutha deck, and I know Rutha only costs 3 already, but again, I just put my commander into play at instant speed. I think is probably better than just hard casting my commander, especially in an Izzet Spellslinger deck where I probably want to leave counter spells up a lot. Coming in at number 6, Behold the Beyond. This one I really am surprised it doesn't get used in Commander more. 5 black sorcery. Discard your hand. Search your library for 3 cards, put them in your hand, then shuffle. This is a relatively newer card, but I never see it in Commander, and I think it's really, really good. 7 mana is a lot, okay, but you're going and getting any 3 cards out of your library. I mean, first of all, you can go get something out of your library like Shadow of the Grave, right? So I go tutor for Shadow of the Grave, then I cast it, and then everything I just discarded, I put back in my hand. But more so, I think I want to use this in a deck where I want to be discarding. Use it in a deck where you want to fill your graveyard. My Egon deck could use this card, where I just wanted to put a bunch of stuff in my graveyard anyway, so it's not going to hurt me. Any deck where you want to be discarding lots, this works. I would put this in an Asmi deck. This could probably fit in there because you want to be discarding a lot. You have lots of Madness cards in there maybe. Even I just don't have a lot of cards in my hand, right? You're not necessarily going to be discarding 7 cards with this. Maybe you only have 1 card, or maybe you only have this card in your hand. 7 mana, I go tutor for 3 things is pretty fantastic, I think. Coming in at number 7, Bedlam, 2 red enchantment. Creatures can't block. That's it. Just creatures can't block. I don't know how many people know this card exists. Again, I like to mention cards that have very unique and also powerful effects. This is a very powerful effect. It does get played in Commander. I've seen it quite a few times in certain decks. Just a great card. Creatures can't block. If you're playing in any kind of aggro strategy, pretty fantastic. Obviously, if you're playing in a Thantis, the Warweaver deck, I think it's probably going to go in a deck like that. I don't know. You can't block either. So maybe not, you know, it depends the strategy you're going with there. I just did a Card Doer Doom Scourge deck in my Underwhelming Commanders video as well, and this is probably a great fit in there because you're goading all the time. If you're goading all the time, you don't have to worry about getting smoked, so the blocking part doesn't hurt you. Marisi Breaker the Coil, same thing, right? That's a red deck that you're going to be goading lots with. Probably an auto-include in a Marisi deck because you also want to be getting in for damage so that you can be goading, so probably an auto-include in that deck. Coming in at number 8, Bereavement, 2 and a black enchantment. Whenever a green creature dies, its controller discards a card. So I mentioned this in my color-specific video where I talked about cards that hate on certain colors and to me I think are worth playing, and this is one of them. We all know green is a really popular color in the format, and green plays a lot of creatures. Obviously you're going to play this in a deck where you don't have any green creatures because it hits you too. So you're going to play this in a mono black deck, Rakdos deck, something that doesn't have green, and any of your opponents that have green creatures, they're just going to be discarding their hands all the time. You could probably throw this in almost any deck. If you're in a discard theme, like a Tiny Bones deck or something like that, if you're in a discard theme already, I think this is a great fit. Coming in at number 9, Blood Frenzy, and another card that I just mentioned in my Underwhelming Commanders video. 1 and a red instant. Cast this spell only before the combat damage step. Target attacking or blocking creature gets +4/+0 until end of turn. Destroy that creature at the beginning of the next end step. Man, this card is really good. Again, this came out in Tempest blocks, so I probably had about 50 of these in my collection. Just like Berserk, I think Berserk is one of the first cards I mentioned in my 10 card series for the same reason, where I use it on my opponent's creature. My opponent is attacking with a creature. I give that creature +4/+0 or +X/+0 in the case of Berserk. my other opponent that's getting attacked, right? I wait till another opponent's getting attacked. They get smoked for more damage. And then the creature that just attacked gets destroyed at the beginning of the next end step. It's win-win for you. This is just all upside. This one is even better maybe because it's attacking or blocking creature. So now you don't have to wait for that very specific instant. You can do it in any situation where my opponent is attacking. Maybe there's an attacking and a blocking creature, and depending on whose power is what, I can manipulate this. So basically both creatures are going to die. This is going to be 2 mana. I kill 2 of my opponent's creatures almost every single time you use it. I think it's great. And coming in at number 10 today is Blood Funnel, and this is a spicy one. I just mentioned this in my Kel's Fight Fixer deck that I thought it might be a good include if you're in a deck where you are sacrificing creatures a lot already. And some guy commented on my other Underwhelming Commanders video, the one where I did Ephemia, the Cacophony, and he said maybe that Blood Funnel would fit great in that deck, and I agree. It's an enchantment, which you want lots of enchantments in that deck, and you want to be sacrificing stuff. You don't need to be sacrificing stuff. I guess you can be sacrificing stuff. And you do have lots of non-creature spells in there, right? Enchantments as well. So Blood Funnel is 1 and a black enchantment. Non-creature spells you cast cost 2 less to cast, which is fantastic, of course. So again, all those enchantments in your Ephemia deck are going to cost 2 less. Also, your instants, your sorceries, right? That Damnation or whatever is only going to cost black and a black. However, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, counter that spell unless you sacrifice a creature. So you got to be careful here, right? You can really sort of hurt yourself. Just like I said with Symbiotic Deployment, you got to have creatures that you can tap with that. If you don't, you can just completely lock yourself out. This is a little less dangerous though, because you're always going to have creatures, right? You always have your commander. You're always going to have your commander that you can cast and then sacrifice to this effect if you absolutely need to. I think you might want though a way to get this off the table. If you get to a point where it gets sticky, maybe the Urtai deck, which I also did in my Underwhelming Commanders video. This is like 10 cards you should be putting in your commander decks, Underwhelming Commanders edition, because almost every single deck I've done, I've mentioned in this video just about, but Urtai also fits here because you're gonna have lots of creatures that you want to sacrifice. This is an enchantment that you can sacrifice and get off the table when it becomes cumbersome for you. Also, you're probably going to have a lot of non-creature spells in that deck because it's going to be an Esper deck, so it probably fits there as well. I mean, it can be dangerous. You got to be careful because if you don't have a creature to sacrifice, all your non-creature spells will just get countered. But any deck where you want to be sacrificing stuff anyway, I think it's a fantastic fit. Definitely goes in a few decks for sure. So that's why I'm giving it a mention. But that is it for today. That is 10 more cards that you should be putting in your commander decks. If you're going to purchase any of these cards, feel free to click on my TCG player link. Helps support the channel. But that is it for today. And thanks for tuning in.